talk is Capitalism, the Steady State Economy. Uneasy bedfellows? I don't need to tell you all what a steady state economy is. The basic concept, in my view, is I'm not too concerned about GDP. I'm concerned about the rate at which we extract natural resources from the environment and use energy to transform them into economic products and hence into waste, which returns to the environment. And if the rate at which we extract resources exceeds renewable capacity or regenerative capacity for those resources, and if the rate at which we spew waste into the ecosystem exceeds absorption capacity, we inevitably deplete our stocks of natural capital that serve as the structural building blocks of our ecosystems and wipe out the ecosystem functions with which we survive, or we create a growing stock of waste that has negative impacts such as global climate change, ocean acidification, etc. We have to have an economy where throughput is within planetary boundaries. And currently, there's very little doubt that our throughput exceeds planetary boundaries. So a lot of economists say that capitalism will work fine. Capitalism can achieve dematerialization. What dematerialization proposes is that we can produce more and more with less and less forever, and that essentially the economy can cease to be a physical system. A lot of us believe this is pure fantasy. If we have to reduce throughput, we live on a planet today with people who are seriously poor, living in misery. We cannot ask those people to reduce their consumption now for the benefits of future generations. If you have to feed your child today, that takes precedence over anything. So for ethical and practical reasons, achieving a steady state economy is going to require a more equal distribution of wealth among the current generation. This means we need a system of contraction and convergence. Wealthy countries need to consume less, and poorer countries need to consume more, until we have a steady state throughput that is well within planetary boundaries. So the question is, can capitalism achieve this? So what is capitalism? So capitalism is defined by private ownership of the means of production, where production is managed for the goal of profit, private profit, essentially. The central characteristics of capitalism include capital accumulation. We always strive to get more capital. It's based on competitive markets, a large number of individual firms competing to provide the same products. It involves the commodification of land, labor, and money. The basic idea is that voluntary transactions are voluntary. Two people to get together, they voluntarily agree on a price at which an exchange takes place. What economists typically say is the goal of a capitalist economy, what it achieves better than any other system, is the satisfaction of subjective preferences. What they typically forget to add is the satisfaction of subjective preferences weighted by purchasing power. Resources flow to those with the greatest purchasing power. So capitalism's approach to achieving a steady state economy, there's a widespread and conventional view that as the price of a resource as the resource becomes scarcer, the price of the resource increases. And this has three impacts. First, it leads the consumers to demand less, and they'll seek substitutes. Second, it leads producers to strive to produce more. And third, it leads producers to strive to develop a substitute. So we'll use the resource more efficiently, we'll develop substitutes. Essentially, the price serves as a negative feedback loop that higher prices decrease demand, increase supply, leading to equilibrium where all needs are met, and the market does this fairly magically. And for a long time, we did see that resource prices were in decline. There was a huge debate. Economists said, proof of our concept is declining resource prices. And they were declining fairly steadily in much of the world through about the year 2000. Now they've gone into fairly precipitous price rises. Another problem with this mechanism, though, is it ignores non-excludable goods and services. So if something can't be owned, there's no reason I would pay for it. There is no price signal. If it becomes scarcer, there is no signal to the market economy to produce more. So things like climate change, acidification of the ocean, depletion of the ozone layer, there is no price signal telling the market to reduce the activities that degrade these things. Another big issue with this is on a full planet. If a price goes up for food, or for oil, or for minerals, or for fish, the idea is it creates an incentive to increase supply. But we live on a full planet. We've maxed out a lot of our ecological surplus.
So if the price of oil goes up, we can certainly extract more now, but that comes at the cost of future extraction. If the price of fish goes up, we can harvest more fish from the ocean, but that reduces the capacity of existing stocks to reproduce, reducing future production. And the same is true for our forests. To some extent, we can step in with fish farming or with plantations, but very often this undermines the ecological benefits. Ecosystems produce essential services without which humans cannot survive. And plantations and farm fisheries do not generate those same benefits. So one thing is, in a full planet, supply cannot respond to this price signal. A second thing is that when we're dealing with essential resources, those things we need energy to do work, we need food to survive, we need water. A price increase does not lead to a decrease in demand because these are essential. They can lead to a small decrease in demand, but you reach a point where we absolutely need those resources. So on a full planet, there is an inability of supply and price to respond as the market claims, as capitalism claims it should, and also ecosystem services and unowned ecological products do not respond as the market says. So the empirical results of this capitalist system have been a dramatic reduction in our natural capital stocks. Capitalism strives for the accumulation of capital. Instead, we've had the decumulation of critically important capital stocks. We've replaced these self-sustaining, self-renewing natural capital with human-made products that break down, wear out, and fall apart, and can only be sustained by a constant flow of raw materials and energy from nature. So this rate of decumulation is seriously threatening planetary boundaries. We cannot maintain this system as is. On the other hand, we can just look at recent news stories. So a big major study says that the price of alternative energy is plunging. It's going to outcompete, in pure capitalist terms, fossil fuels, and we're going to move to this alternative energy economy, and nothing needs to get in the way of endless economic growth. And big studies just coming out saying that, we can continue with business as usual and the magic of the market will replace fossil fuels with alternative energy and we'll be fine. What they forget to mention, though, is that we currently have so much fossil fuel energy, we need to build a 1 gigawatt power plant per day from now until, for the next 40 years, simply to replace existing fossil fuel energy. The power plants we create might last 25 to 30 years and hence have to be replaced themselves. The energy flows required to produce all of these new power plants will increase our energy demand. It's a really, really challenging situation. We cannot be complacent that it will simply happen. So a lot of economists absolutely recognize that the market, unattended, unregulated, is not going to do this. So they say we can step in, though, and take a second kind of a hybrid capitalist approach. What we need to do is get the prices right. We need to feed the price signals of ecological degradation, of resource extraction, of waste emissions, feed those price signals back into the market. The way we do this, actually, the government has to step in, and one thing, it can either charge for waste emissions and resource extractions through some type of tax, or it can limit, it can set caps on how many resources we use based on our best ecological science, set a cap, and then either auction off that cap or somehow distribute the rights to use that to the private sector where it becomes tradable, it becomes a market commodity. And this is going to internalize negative externalities, have the market reflect the full cost of its activities. So a couple of things to bring about here. First of all, this actually implies that the state has the right to do this, has the right to charge people for using natural resources or for emitting waste, or to actually claim ownership and limit how much people can use. In either case, this strikes me as social ownership of the means of production, or state ownership of the means of production. It is certainly a large, it's not the same as a capitalist system. We can call it a hybrid system, where the state and society controls the natural means of production. So we have a hybrid system. It's not pure capitalism, but could this work? Prices in this case, if we use taxes, prices are not determined by voluntary agreements. Prices have to be the ecological costs, we would need an army of technocrats to go out there and measure the marginal cost of resource extraction or ecological degradation within a highly complex interrelated ecosystem where waste emissions have a huge impact on forest productivity, on fisheries productivity, an intensely complex interrelated system. We have to figure out the cost signal. An army of technocrats is required to do this, feed that signal back to the government that then somehow transmits it into prices to the political system, which is, in my mind, only slightly more complex than the centralized Soviet government or Soviet economy that was so many economists complained about. It's an extremely centralized system that abandons many of the characteristics of the market. This would be internalizing prices through a taxation system. Perhaps a simpler system is to use ecological constraints and set one-time limits on resource extraction, in which case ecological limits determine prices. We can set those ecological constraints and adjust them. That may be a simpler process than constantly adjusting prices according to the marginal costs of our economic activities. So if we manage to feed prices into the capitalist system so it will reflect the true cost to ecosystems, is this going to lead to the desirable ends? Is this going to achieve the greatest good for the greatest number? And there's real empirical evidence we can turn to see how effectively this would work. So the basic idea is a price signal will lead people to consume less and create substitutes. We had a huge price signal for food in 2007. The price of wheat tripled. The price of corn and rice doubled. These are staple grains. A tripling of price is a major price signal. And I ask anyone in the audience, how much less bread did you consume in 2007 in response to that price change? If you're from a developed nation, you actually, statistically, consumed exactly the same amount of bread as in previous years. The price signal is inadequate to affect you. The reason for this, in the United States, if I buy a loaf of bread, I spend 10 cents on wheat out of that $2 loaf of bread. The price of wheat triples, I pay $2.20. That's a very small share of my budget. I don't even notice it. Who was affected by this dramatically in countries where they're consuming inadequate food per person per day, where the marginal value of food is immensely high, where it meets basic physiological needs. We saw the countries consuming less than 2,000 calories per person per day have a dramatic decline in their consumption of food. It led to breakouts of riots all across Africa and the Middle East. Many people attribute the Arab Spring to the rising food prices. So what's food have to do with ecosystem services? Well, agriculture is currently the greatest threat to global ecosystems in terms of land use change, biodiversity loss, nitrogen runoff, phosphorus runoff, greenhouse gas emissions, a number of freshwater use, a number of other factors. If we feed the ecological costs back into the price of food, what we will see is the wealthy countries and the wealthy people consuming as much as ever. The people with the lowest marginal utility in terms of physiological need from additional consumption will continue to get the marginal unit of food. The people with the greatest physiological need will be systematically excluded. So it seems very clear that feeding prices into full cost prices into our economic activities could lead to perverse outcomes. Another major issue, we do need, I am not a technological optimist, I don't think technology solves the problem, but technology plays an important role. We need alternative energy technologies. We need better ways to produce food. Can the market lead to this? We create a price signal. Users of energy now have to pay the cost of the price of emissions. They have a huge incentive to develop new substitutes. In a market economy, if you just develop, the only incentive to develop a new technology is if you get property rights to it. Because otherwise, I'd spend a fortune developing this new technology. Anybody who wants could use it. So we have the patent system. We have a bunch of firms competing to be the first to develop a new technology. Whoever gets there first gets a 20-year patent. And that patent allows them to sell this technology at the highest cost the market will bear. If we develop a technology for clean energy that's decentralized, clean, safe, and cheap, somebody would put a price on that, charge it for such a high price that China and India might continue to burn coal. The fact is that information is not only non-rival, that use by one person does not leave less for others, but it's anti-rival. When one person uses the technology and shares it with another, that leads to its improvement. New scientists can make it better and better and better. The value of a non-renewable resource is maximized at a price of zero. The market creates incentives only by privatizing, put a price on it, and rationing access, which actually systematically reduces the economic surplus those technologies could generate. So markets are the wrong tool for developing the green market. What we need is cooperative approaches to developing the technologies and sharing it freely for all. So economists say, but people are incapable of cooperation. The idea of designing an institution based on cooperation when people are inherently self-interested is flawed. There's been an enormous amount of research on the evolution of cooperation in humans, and there is now convincing evidence that humans evolved as bands on the African plain. The group that had the most cooperative and altruistic individuals outcompeted other groups, and therefore left more offspring, which could branch off into more new groups. So you had a selection pressure at the group level that led to the evolution of cooperation. Within the group, however, it was still self-interest that had a selective advantage over cooperation. So we evolved with dual selective pressures at the same time for cooperation and for competition. It happens also that there are certain types of problems we face that are best solved through cooperation, others through competition. So one would think that a pool of humans could be capable of pursuing in either type of behavior to address the challenges we face. Currently, most of the serious challenges we face on the planet can be modeled as prisoners' dilemmas. So global climate change, wiping out biodiversity, resource depletion. These can easily be modeled as prisoners' dilemmas in which the only solution is cooperation. Each individual acting in their own self-interest creates an invisible foot that undermines the common good. So we do have these selective pressures that allow humans to cooperate or allow humans to compete. Excellent studies have shown we can develop institutions that stimulate cooperative behavior or stimulate competitive behavior. One well-studied institution is known as altruistic punishment. You can play a public goods game in which everybody is given an endowment. The share of that endowment they can return to the public pool, which in cases doubled and redistributed equally to everybody. If everybody contributes their endowment to the public pool, they all end up with twice as much. Each individual, however, behaving selfishly, is better off keeping their share of the endowment and benefiting from what others donate. What happens if we play this game over time, a bunch of people will donate a lot because they're naturally pro-social. A bunch of people will donate little because they're naturally selfish or educated as economists. And if you play the game over and over again, you get to a situation where nobody donates because nobody wants to be a sucker. If you're donating less than the mean, you reduce your donation in the subsequent round, you end up with nobody donating. You can play an alternative version in which after a round, you are told who did not donate and who did, and you are allowed to use some of your resources to punish the non-donators. If they didn't donate, you can put some of your endowment in, and it will subtract twice as much from the non-donators. This quickly makes it a bad idea. It makes it against the self-interest of the self-interested people not to donate. You can take it a step further and punish people who fail to punish the defectors. Very quickly, this leads to a system where you can play the game that converges to complete cooperation. We have the option of creating institutions that lead to cooperation or lead to defection and competition. I would argue that the market is fundamentally one of the most powerful systems for rewarding self-interest and punishing cooperation. We survived for 200,000 years as highly cooperative hunter-gatherer societies. We know we are capable of doing this. Huge amounts of anthropological and archaeological evidence that we were very cooperative. We punished the non-cooperators. We need to develop new institutions that lead people to cooperate to solve these common goods problems and prisoners' dilemmas problems that we now face. We know we can do it. Great research is showing the path forward, and it is not capitalism. Capitalism is fine for allocating totally unimportant things. Clothing styles and the latest iPhone. But when it comes to essential and non-substitutable resources on a finite planet, capitalism fails miserably. We need to develop institutions that reflect the problems we currently face today.